Hello, Dr. John with the Voyage Clinics podcast. Our mission is to just help families and our communities grow. And today I have a sweet guest, Richard Tripp. Thanks for joining me today, Richard.
Happy to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us an introduction. We've done a podcast together on kind of sexual health and those kinds of things. Today we're going to talk a little bit about relationships and overcoming obstacles and helping in that space. But give us a little bit more about your background.
Great. So I am a clinical mental health counselor and certified sex therapist. So I work with individuals, couples, anywhere from teenagers on up to 100 years of age or older if they want to come in. So kind of do a broad range of therapy that way. I own my own company, Rocky Top Mental Health. And so there's a few of us working as therapists there, and we just love helping people, and it's the greatest job ever. So
good old Rocky Top. You want to talk about, let's talk about Tennessee. So they're doing well this year.
It's a shout out to University of Tennessee. Yeah. One of my favorite universities. Never went to school there, got degrees from other universities, but I've got roots back at Tennessee. So
that's fantastic.
That's what keeps me grounded there, I guess.
And orange is a healing color.
Is it really?
My mom told me this when I was a young kid. I was like, orange, Mom? I'm not going to wear orange to school. And I don't know if she was trying to just get me to wear orange. But yeah, she told me it's a healing color.
It is for me. So I'm colorblind. So orange actually pops for me. And that's part of the reason and the love, passion, obsession, according to my wife, for University of Tennessee. So,
well, that's fantastic. They're playing well this year.
Yeah.
Let's get into it just a little bit. So, many different styles of relationships right now in society. And I think what we're trying to accomplish in any relationship is a connection and a validation and maybe a witness to our life's journey. Mm-hmm. And I think in those spaces, we can kind of sometimes get stuck, right? And I want to speak to that a little bit about maybe like you've been, your niche might be like sex therapy, but you probably do a lot of like relationship therapies and discussions in that space. What are some of the common things that you see? What are some of the most common, I think maybe some of the most common obstacles that you help couples overcome in really deepening their relationships?
That's a great question. And it kind of incorporates a lot of different areas.
Yeah, we can go along ways.
But I would say probably the biggest thing that we talk about is security within the relationship. I think, as individuals, we often come with various insecurities that we've learned throughout life. And that can sometimes make it difficult to have the vulnerability that's necessary to be able to really create a secure and trusting relationship. If you're not able to be vulnerable, you're not able to really create security. And so some of it is just the stuff that we bring individually. And then in relationships, we struggle. None of us are perfect at the relationships that we're in. And we have a tendency to do things that really threaten that security and that trust within the relationship. And so a lot of times it's helping people understand, what's getting in the way of having a closer and healthier relationship, and then what they can do to strengthen that.
So you mentioned something really interesting, and vulnerability. If someone is secure enough in their own skin, in their own way, they might be willing to be more vulnerable. Yeah. What are the sources of some of those insecurities, and how can we look at that and say, yeah, and I want to circle back on vulnerability because I really feel like vulnerability is the key. Mm-hmm. And if you think of like any relationship that you have with any person, if you were in a vulnerable situation with that person, you were in the trenches, people like army buddies or people on football teams or people giving you very like maybe centric things, but ballet class, like dance class. If you were in a hard situation where you were both putting it all on the line, very vulnerable, very out there, those relationships are like still present 20 years down the road. and you just have this deep love because you were so vulnerable together. So I want to speak to vulnerability a lot, and how can we be better at being vulnerable? But I also want to understand just a little bit your thoughts on this sense of security thing. And are there forces at play right now? And what are some ways that we can be more secure in our own skin, with our own self, with our own perception of self, and, kind of get rid of some of those pitfalls with self-security?
Yeah. I think we live in a world that has a tendency to point out all of our faults, all of our flaws, all of the negatives that we have. And it's really hard to be secure when that is your focus in life. And so individually, it's, well, I do this wrong and I do that wrong, and I'm not perfect here and I'm not perfect there. And, and then you start junior high, and, everybody is really easy to point out all of your flaws. And at least in my junior high experience there, it's like, well, you're not this, you're not that enough. And we kind of get caught up in those
decided junior high was a good idea?
I don't know.
This is the worst idea.
Can we just ship our kids all off to a farm, let them learn how to work? And
junior high is bad.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and yet we carry some of those. I remember years ago going to my high school reunion. I think we're like maybe 20 years, 15 years. I don't know. High school reunion. And I went back into that kind of insecure, kind of feel like, and here I am, I've got a career, wonderful wife, family, and all of those emotions start to come back. And so they stick with us, and they, we carry those around. A lot of them a lot of the insecurities we may experience can come from family of origin. Do we have a secure family environment? Are we feeling loved? Are we feeling valued by our parents? And I know therapists always love to go to mommy and daddy issues, but there really is a lot of research on, what type of attachment style someone has based on their family of origin. So you can develop anxious attachment or avoidant attachments, or a secure attachment. And, so a lot of that does kind of go back to how we grow up within our own families of origin.
I think the emotional state, and you had this like very visceral regression of like some insecurities. You're like, what is going on with me?
Yeah.
And that's so true. It's funny. I have a group of buds that we hung out since high school, and we're all like, we're all in our 40s, and we're all very independent. We have families, we got kids, we've done things, and we're very successful. Everybody's successful, but we get together, and it's funny, the roles that we take on. And there was always one that he was always kind of the one that we'd kind of pick on, and we love him, and we're all great friends. But he kind of, even in our adulthood, he would assume that role. And I remember like thinking, I don't want you to assume that role. And I don't want to treat you this way. And it is funny because he was positioned that way, we all just like, oh, there he is. And we poke him. And it was just teasing, and it was in good jest. But I thought that's fascinating that 20 years later, we can be stuck in those same little trenches. And these are, maybe harmless examples, but those are some of the things that I think if your father tells you one day that you are this, and you believe that, and then you start this dialogue, I am ugly, or I am less than, or I am not this, or I am this or that. And then you believe it, and then it becomes part of who your existence is. And then to re-script that and rework that is a challenge. I see as a family doctor, I see a lot of health and wellness in my clinic, and I'm navigating people toward hopefully a better wellness state. And a lot of what I see is intellectual, emotional, wellness stuff. And folks are stuck, and I see them stuck, and I'm like, whoa, you believe that? And they're like, 1000% yes. Yeah. And I'm like, well, how can we change that belief? Right. And I don't know the magic of therapy, but I send them to you, and you guys do some cool work.
Well, and it's simple in theory, I guess, and a lot harder in practice, but it's just a constant reassurance of the truth rather than the lies that we've believed most of our life, kind of a thing. And so getting back to, I'm not an ugly person. I'm not weak. Or it's okay to be flawed. It's okay to be imperfect. And just really reinforcing and reassuring ourselves up here that we're okay.
Yeah.
And it takes a while.
When does that happen developmentally? Because I see that in my kids. Like I've got teenagers and I've got a 21-year-old and a 19 and a 16 and a 14-year-old. And I see some of them are still in that like fear of vulnerability state. And some of them have embraced a sense of security and they're very comfortable with vulnerability and showing flaws and being, mortal and all that. I think it's even trickier. My question still stands, but but it's even trickier in our current social media environment where you have magnifications and amplifications of how perfect everyone else is and how flawed you are. And that can really be very damaging to that sense of self-security
for sure
and self-confidence. And creating a lot of envy, a lot of, negative self-image stuff and comparing yourself to other people. And it can get really, really nasty. So the environment for kids is really, really challenging. Yeah.
And to answer your question, I don't know. Because I think it depends on the personality of the individual, whether teenager or child or, adult. But I've seen and know people in their 50s, 60s who still are carrying those insecurities. I think, sometimes it gets a little bit easier when your brain is more fully developed and you're able to kind of recognize truth a little bit better, within your own life. But it still is hard. You've still been carrying that baggage for sometimes your whole life.
I remember in high school, there was a time, it might've been earlier, where I was really comfortable being a dork. And I played all the sports. I did all the academic stuff. It's
really hard to imagine you as a dork at any phase of your life.
But what I was comfortable with was just, being a dork. And I remember me and my buddy went to a dance one time and we were just so dorky. Like we were deliberately being weirdos and awkward and kind of silly. And we were so comfortable there. And it wasn't because I don't know. I just think there was a sense of we do care what other people think, but it doesn't affect who we are. And I guess that's what self-confidence kind of is, where we can see the other thoughts of other people and smile and say, it's okay. You can think or believe whatever you want, but I know who I am. And I know I'm a reasonably decent human, and and the I ams that I create in my these words of creation, right? These I ams, I am this or I am that, and you are that. I want to speak to that just briefly as well. Being careful with parenting and the way that we speak to our kids. I see kids and adults and they said, yeah, somebody told me that I was this, and I believed it. And that's back when I was like 6 years old. And I never re-scripted that, and they never re-scripted that for me. And if we tell our kids, you are stupid, you are fat, you are dumb, you're literally creating the possibility of a massive insecurity down the road. And so just being careful as parents to, what's a better way? I grew up in a super dysfunctional family, so I have no idea how I turned out reasonably normal, but
a better way in terms of
parenting. Is there a better way to talk to our kids and to, cause we all want to correct, right? We want to course correct and same thing with relationships. So this is probably a relationship with kids, but a relationship with our spouses as well. We never want to tell our spouse, you are so this or you are that. Maybe is there a better way of you are being this or I'd appreciate it.
So I would even be careful with being, because it's just another form of the you are. It's always been my philosophy, and I've tried to talk with people, that it's not our place to judge people. We can judge behavior. And so, again, if it's our own children, if it's a spouse, we can express or make a judgment based on a behavior. And sometimes that still might sting a little bit to our loved ones, but that's much better than, oh my gosh, you are so dumb, as opposed to, oh, I'm so frustrated where did you set your homework or all of your books for school? You know, and I'm frustrated with this behavior versus you're dumb because you're doing this behavior. And so really being able to separate behavior from being. And
that is a challenge if you didn't grow up in that kind of functional communication home, which I did not. And so, so it can be really, really challenging to pull away. You're almost disassociating from judging them or even like saying anything like addressing them, but you're disassociating from that direct, and you're looking at this behavior and saying, well, I love you and I hear your concerns and I want to validate those emotions that you're having, but this behavior right here is just not it.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a really good podcast, Huron Labs on parenting. And I forget who he's interviewing. She's phenomenal. I should remember her name, but I don't have it in my memory bank right now. But absolutely delivering nuggets of parenting goodness. And she talks about the parent's responsibility of, and this relates to relationships too, we'll tie it. But she says, you know, your responsibility as a parent is really just to validate your child and just believe them. That's it. And the child's responsibility in life is really just to have emotions, and that's it. And I thought that was so simple and so clean. It's just, I think, again, these are scripts that I have, right? That I'm stuck in my paradigms of, well, it's my job as a father to shore up my family and to make sure they're doing just these things in the correct way. And if they're not, I have to call them out and check them and fix it. And maybe that's incorrect, right? And because what that creates is like a critical eye toward that person instead of an aware eye of behaviors that might not be appropriate. I'm working on it.
I think we all are. We all are. And, you know, I like the simplified version, and maybe I'll find out who it was that was on the podcast and I'll be like, oh, I can't believe I disagreed. No, and I don't disagree. I think there is a little bit more nuance to that. Like, I mean, obviously we want to create this foundation of validation and like we're talking about security for our children, but we also want to help them develop the skills to navigate life too. And part of that is helping them understand, again, this difference between behavior and who they are. But yeah, there are certain behaviors that we do need to correct, even if it is a little bit challenging emotionally. And let's talk about how to work through those challenges. But I mean, the whole losing your school books, that was literally last night with my 13-year-old son. Oh. And he hasn't done his schoolwork for a couple of days because he couldn't even doesn't even remember where his school books were. Love the kid to death. He is... I don't have a favorite child, but he is amazing. Like
he's an amazing human.
He's a great human. And I love him. He has so many skills, but we also need to help him learn to figure out where his books are. I guess that's one. Two, to actually do his schoolwork so that he can accomplish those things as he gets older. But again, if we keep it about the behavior, like, hey buddy, you know, maybe we change some things up. Let's help you with this. Can we have a permanent place for where your books are so that they're not, you know, in some random room that you're hardly ever in and they just happen to get there? Yeah. You know? And so, they're obviously, I think at the end of the day, our kids' emotional maturity and helping them through the, you know, helping them develop that emotional maturity is probably one of the most important things, helping them feel validated. That is going to help them as they continue through their life. But there still is, you know, a little bit of that. And, you know, these basics, we got to make sure that, you know, if I'm going to give you keys to a car at 16, we've got to learn some responsibility and things too, and we'll correct the behavior. And I think that's for all of us. Can we do that for ourselves? You know, if I'm making mistakes, can I make it about, oh, here's a behavior that I got caught up in, maybe that doesn't align with my values, or it is just a mistake, and that doesn't have to define me. I don't have to let that define me. It doesn't.
So when taking correction from someone else about a behavior, I think that's really wise, like that statement that you just said, because I think sometimes in a relationship, when one or one of the partners is trying to discuss a behavior that's like kind of want to fix that a little bit. The other person can take that so personally and think, oh yeah, that's me. No, it's just a behavior that's there and that you're working on, maybe, if someone points it out to you.
Yeah.
And this is me loving you and trying to help, point it out. And that's tricky. That's really tricky to even, I thought, so us, as the person that is maybe addressing the behavior concern, addressing the behavior, not the individual, and not saying you are this is just a behavior that's there. But then also from the receiving side of that, to really believe that this isn't me, this is a behavior that I'm doing that I can change, and having the plasticity to kind of navigate that. Yeah. Super cool.
Yeah. It's fun. It's fun working with people. But it is tricky too. It's hard to let go of the patterns and the beliefs that we've learned throughout life.
Vulnerability. Let's circle back just a little bit. Are there exercises we can do to be more, just to be better at being vulnerable? Muchísimo, like family, there's all kinds of little obstacles against being vulnerable. What are some tips and tricks to vulnerability in a relationship? Like how can we get there? How can we have those deeper conversations and have those deeper connection moments? And, I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
Well, first of all, I'm just going to say I've been geeking out on Brene Brown, who does a lot of work.
The Power of Vulnerability. She's awesome.
The Power of Vulnerability.
She's awesome.
Daring greatly. And so some of the stuff that I've loved that she has said is really redefining what vulnerability is. Because I think in fact, in Daring Greatly, she hits all of these different myths about vulnerability. And I think the biggest one is that vulnerability is weakness. And so we're not even going to go there. We're not even going to try to go to vulnerability if we see it as weakness. And as we see it as, just a given that we're going to get hurt in some way, emotionally, physically, whatever it is. Whereas, she talks about even the definitions of vulnerability is I think it's the capability of being wounded. If you're vulnerable, you are capable of being wounded. And weakness is the inability to defend yourself from wounds. Or to kind of, I think, don't hold me to that.
That's
specific.
Okay. I think I followed you.
Definition. Do you want me to reframe that? So vulnerability is like if we're vulnerable, we're capable of being hurt. But it doesn't necessarily mean we will be hurt. If we just see it as weakness, well, weakness is that it's almost a given that we'll be hurt. Like here's this area that will be hurt, that we won't be able to navigate or be able to work through because we have this weakness. And so separating the two of those, that vulnerability is a good thing. Weakness we don't necessarily want. Now we all have them, but if I'm going in somewhere and I have a weakness and, the probability is that I'm going to get hurt emotionally in some way, I'm not going to go in. I'm going to protect myself.
Right.
Whereas doing a podcast or, talking to groups or, talking to my spouse about something serious, like there is a capability of being hurt because we're opening ourselves up emotionally. Doesn't necessarily mean we will be hurt, but we're capable of that. And so, but there's strength in that as well. So I don't know. I always like to use analogies, so maybe I can help explain this a little bit more. You look confused. I'm so sorry.
No, I love this. And in fact, I think this is the root of true love.
Yeah.
This is the root of that willingness to enter a relationship where you could potentially be hurt deeply. You're trusting this person to the deepest degree and then being willing to put yourself on the line. And that is vulnerable. A real relationship is built on the foundation of vulnerability.
Well, and if you circle back around to security and insecure attachments and that kind of stuff, then we just don't believe anymore in our ability to be safe in vulnerability, if that makes sense.
Say that one more time.
Okay, so if we have insecure attachments, all of these things we've talked about in childhood that have kind of led us to not feeling secure, well, we have a much more difficult time to go to that level of vulnerability.
Oh, sure.
Because everything is a threat.
You bet. I'm definitely going to get hurt.
Yeah.
You're weakened. You're not vulnerable. You're just weak.
So I love medieval warfare. I love medieval movies and that kind of stuff. And a lot of times I'll use different things, even in relationships. We can talk about John Gottman's Four Horsemen in terms of medieval things.
Gottman,
But one of the things in terms of vulnerability is you can lock yourself away in the dungeon of a castle and you won't be very vulnerable because you're not going to be out there. There's less capability of ever being one. You're just locked in a dungeon.
Yeah.
However, your weakness goes up. If anybody gets in there and you're just locked away in this dungeon or in a basement somewhere, your likelihood of getting killed or getting hurt or whatever it is goes through the roof. However, if you're out there on the battlefield, with your sword just,
cranking away,
you're in a very vulnerable place. You are very capable of being wounded in those circumstances, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you will. It just, you're in a place, but if you're really good and you're well trained and you're secure in your talents and who you are, that's just an opportunity to gain more confidence. Does that make sense?
Totally.
The vulnerability, weakness difference.
I love it. So in a relationship, I find myself in states of vulnerability and connection and beauty. And then I find myself sometimes in states of not that at all,
yes,
of pure defense, of like, and I mean, maybe some built-in whatever from me, but maybe
all of us.
Yeah. How is that? How is it? How can we be better at that space of vulnerability with our partners?
With our partner.
Yeah.
So first of all, I think in any relationship, you kind of mentioned, how do we build that vulnerability?
Yeah. How do we work on it?
And it's little by little. We give someone a little bit that, could potentially wound us, that, maybe is sensitive to us emotionally or whatever it is, or that we don't feel, might make us feel a little bit insecure. And we give someone that. Are they trustworthy? What do they do with that information? What do, and so we kind of test the waters. We do this when we're dating. We do this with friendships. We do this in a lot of different ways. It's like, oh, well, here's something I can share. It's not something I would necessarily post completely, online for everybody, but here's something that I'll share. Let me see what you do with it. And I think we, Gottman again talks about bids for connection and different things. And I think we do this a lot in relationships, and particularly in marriage.
Even relationships that are 20 years deep or more.
Even relationships that are 20 years, especially in relationships that are 20 years deep. Yeah. And so we're constantly making those bids for connection. And that helps to reinforce the fact that we're in a vulnerable place, but it's a vulnerable place of security, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
We're secure in that vulnerability.
Yeah.
Because we're opening up more emotionally, particularly in a marriage or a committed relationship. And so, and hopefully by the time we've gone there, both partners, both people have, given each other enough that we have something to be, to kind of prove that trustworthiness, to kind of create that foundation for security. What I see happen a lot in relationships, and, this gets into Gottman, John Gottman talks about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse for relationships and marriages. Do you know what those 4 horsemen are?
No, I was thinking of Peter Attia's 4 horsemen on health and wellness, but
okay, so
different horsemen. It just
a little bit different.
But Gottman's awesome. I like.
Yeah, Gottman is great. He is the go-to in terms of relationships. But he says criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling are what will destroy a relationship.
Yeah.
And so when you think about that, as we've talked all about vulnerability and security, those things undermine all of that foundation.
Totally.
And what happened, and this is often where I go to medieval warfare, but when we start doing that, criticism, I often equate it to like a spear. It's a little bit like, oh, I hate it when you do this, right? And we're kind of nitpicking all that, and we're just kind of poking. It's a little bit further away. It's not so personal, but like we're just taking jabs at each other. Contempt is like a sword. You're much more closer. It's more personal. It's more of a hatred. You despise the person you're with, and lack of respect and all this kind of stuff can do more damage It's much more personal. Defensiveness is like a shield, and stonewalling is like a stone wall.
Yeah.
And the reason that I bring that up is just the visual of, here is your partner. Here is your spouse, the person that hopefully you're the closest to. But when this is happening, now you are enemies.
Yeah, totally.
And we destroy each other that way. We destroy the relationship when those things come in. Now, it's not to say that like you said one harsh thing to your spouse that your relationship is over. But if that continues over time, it will destroy the relationship.
It is super true. And it's funny that 2 of those are offensive positions and 2 of those are defensive positions. And criticism and contempt and defensiveness and stonewalling, I mean, one is just deeper than the other on both ends of that. It's like a little...
Yeah.
And yeah, I've seen in, I guess, growing up, you know, I've seen my parents hurt each other in the deepest of ways emotionally. And I thought when I was a young kid, I was like, man, that's like the worst thing you could possibly say to somebody that you love. And it's funny, like as we're more vulnerable with each other, I think it creates a potential rift of fear that I'm super vulnerable. My heart is splayed open for this person. And if they want to take offense on it, they can very easily. And then it creates those defensive positions and those stonewalling positions. And then it all goes to hell. And so what I'm hearing is, to maybe not do those things.
It's really good to not do those.
The key is the opposite of maybe those things. So maybe instead of, and I was thinking as you were speaking about vulnerability, I was thinking, I almost think my wife's vulnerability is really my job. So I can build her in such a way and compliment her and love her and be kind to her and in such a way that she's more comfortable being vulnerable with me. And vice versa, if she can, as she endorses and validates me and I'm like, oh, I'm really comfortable around being in my skin and who I am around this person. And that's really cool.
Can I shift one little thing?
Yeah.
Not to pick up. Yeah. I think, you know, that it's your job.
You're the expert, by the way. I'm just a family doc.
No. I love that. I think that's great. I always like to shift it to, it's my privilege.
Oh yeah.
To be able to hold and to help and to nurture and have a safe place to be vulnerable. Otherwise, you know, sort of like, well, it's my job to take out the trash at night too. Yeah. But like, do we really see that as a privilege?
Yeah.
To be that person for our spouses.
Yeah.
Where they can come and hopefully be at that level of vulnerability to create that secure environment. And when we look at it that way, it's an awesome privilege.
Yeah.
And
so if we could take the opposites of what Gottman speaks to and you know, 4 horsemen of destroying somebody's relationship or yours or mine or whoever.
Relationships in general.
Yeah, relationships in general. The opposite of those things, you know, so if you're looking at like criticism, maybe it's building them up. It's complimenting them. Praise. Yeah.
Compliment.
Mm-hmm. Contempt. Is there a deeper version of that?
I mean, I think it really starts with stepping back and saying, can I really see this person for the great person that they are?
Yeah.
You know, for some reason there's been pain and it's been very personal, but you know, can I personally, you know, step out of maybe my own pain or whatever I'm going through and really look at and recognize that? I would say, go to your wedding album, pull out your wedding album. Like, I'm guessing most people didn't have a whole lot of contempt for each other on their wedding day. I hope they haven't.
Oh, there but probably then they left the toothpaste out for 20 years. And
yeah. You know, what was it that attracted us to our spouses to begin with? And those beautiful experiences that we've had and how we looked at them on our wedding day. Mm-hmm. You know, can we get back to that? Can we see who they are?
Yeah. I love it. There's kind of a movement around HSP, highly sensitive person thing. It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of a new DSM-5 criteria for diagnosing high sensitive persons things. And I've been thinking about this because I have a couple of patients who are in this space. And I've been thinking, I think we all are highly sensitive. And I think we all need to be nurtured and cherished. And sometimes we're less good at that. And sometimes we're too bullish with each other, with each other's emotions, with each other's experiences. And sometimes we need to be a little more tender and a little more, I think always we need to be a little more sensitive and aware and cognizant of what's going on. And how can I cherish this situation? How can I have the privilege of navigating this with that person? And I think we fail quite a bit in that space. At least I do. And I think the difference between emotional intelligent folks and folks that maybe are less emotional intelligence is just being willing to go back and repair, go back and say, yeah, honey, I just sucked at that. And I was trying to give you some thoughts and I came across way too critical and I apologize. And so I think I do this with my kids a lot too. Mm-hmm. And I do it with my wife. I'm like, oh, I messed that up pretty bad. Yeah. Just being willing to kind of, and again, I think that's my vulnerability, mm-hmm. to go back to them and say, I'm being vulnerable. I apologize. I was a total jerk.
Yeah.
And let's fix this. I don't want this to, affect us going forward.
Which I think is one of the greatest lessons you can teach them, mm-hmm. particularly your children, that like when you do make mistakes and you're going to, can you come back around, learn from it? What can you do to grow from that mistake?
Is there an art to repair? So I just do it and I just courageously go forward and I suck at it too. But like, when you have been critical, then they're defensive, then they've stonewalled. I consider this like, I've seen a lot in relationships when I deal with families as their family doc and it's like, I call it these wedges of enmity. Like mm-hmm. there's this little wedge that started with like criticism and contempt and then some defensiveness. And then now, he's totally stonewalled from you. And how do we correct that? Is there an art to maybe pulling out that wedge of enmity and getting past that so that you can both get back to that vulnerable space?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. First of all, it takes willingness. And a lot of times when that wedge is in there, one or both people are not willing to change.
Right. It's super hard.
So willingness to recognize that. Can I share? So full of analogies. Can I share another?
Dude, you're like analogy? The king of analogies.
I am. I don't know if that's the way my brain works, but in terms of relationships, the things that start to create that wedge, kind of seeing three things that come up. First, we get distracted. Then more distance is created. And then there's the destruction of the relationship. And I think the destruction part really is, as the four horsemen take over and we really start destroying that. Yeah. Well, how do we switch that? If we start with destruction, the opposite of that would be construction. Are we going to create something new? Are we recognizing that this is not working anymore? Mm-hmm. And if we want our relationship to work, if we're willing to work on it, we need to construct a new paradigm, a new way to even just interact with, to live in the same house with each other or whatever it is. And so, that is first, when I work with couples, we got to get rid of this criticism and this contempt, to using the language that we use against each other. And, we've got to try to cut that out as much as possible. I have this wonderful couple and they are so awesome, but they are so passionate. And when they get upset, the things they will say to each other.
Yeah.
And just the other day, I was like, if I said what you just said to your wife, you would literally kill me. And he said, I know. And they're starting to get it and they want to change. It's just this pattern that they've got into.
Wow.
So it is changing that pattern. It's like, we're not going to use that kind of language anymore. Yeah. We're not going to, speak out in anger. We're going to take a little bit of a break or put a pause on things if we're in this heightened state of arousal emotionally. and then come back and talk about things. So really cutting out the destructive stuff and then talking about, okay, how can we construct something healthier? A lot of times that's just, okay, we know how not to communicate. Let's give you some basic communication tools and some skills. If you need to express something, how can we talk in a way that it's not coming off as critical or contemptuous? Therapists love I feel statements. And you know what? If you go with an I feel statement, that has a tendency to make someone a whole lot less defensive than you, kind of a thing. And so just a few of those things to help them to start building on so that they can reconstruct, and then you've got the distance. Well, what can we help in terms of the distance? What are the ways that we can connect? And hopefully we're not to this place where there's destruction necessarily, but if there's distance in your relationship, what can we do to strengthen love languages to where we're feeling more connected? What can we do to get, to strengthen our emotional intimacy, our sexual intimacy, and just really kind of start to get back together so that it's really about us and we rather than you and I all the time. And that helps us to resist this whole, we're going to fight each other over something. It's how do we work together on a challenge? I've had couples where one is struggling with maybe pornography or something like that, and they're beating each other up. They're going to all of the 4 horsemen. And, and I'm like, okay, this isn't really helping you guys. You guys are not happier. How about both of you get on the same page and fight the porn together? You bring different skills. You bring different things to the table. Together, you can fight a lot better than when you're fighting each other. And that's that connection. And so, I know I talked about different cards that you read, last time on our podcast, cards that help you, emotional intimacy. I think sexual intimacy is a really important thing. Date nights, we make bids for connection. Can we, really pay attention to what our spouses are doing and what they need? And that kind of gets it over into the other one. We are so distracted. It can be children. It can be work. It can be our phones, social media, TV, Tennessee football. All of those things become distractions. And so really it's the opposite of that. If you're distracted, you want to concentrate more. How do we concentrate a little bit more? Where do I stop? Do I put a little bit more effort into seeing my wife, seeing what she needs, listening if she says something, all of those kind of things that have a tendency to blow by, not because I don't care, not because I don't love her, but just have a tendency to go right over my head because I'm distracted and focused on something else.
Yeah.
And so that's the approach I like to take as I'm working with people. Like, can we recognize these things and can we, here are some of the things we can do. Let's rebuild, let's construct better models. Let's connect in healthy ways and let's concentrate our efforts into all of those things to strengthen our relationship.
So much wisdom to unpack in that. That is super, super great. I love the distraction part. Just recognizing that distraction is probably the first thing that starts to deteriorate and degrade a relationship. All it takes is just distraction. I don't have to get them to, throw stones at each other. Just distract them enough to stop paying attention. And the gals all accuse the guys of not paying attention. I don't know what my wife's talking about, but it is easy to get distracted right now. Like just so easy. And I think part of it is, working long hours. There's lots of different excuses we have for being distracted, but you get home and you just want to sit down to a football game or you want to sit down to nerd out and just zone out for a bit. And that's fine. If you want to take some downtime, but then make a concerted effort to connect, deliberate, intentional, like pay attention to that person, ask questions about their day and talk about it and listen and feel that. And even if it was an seemingly insignificant day, that deliberate attention as opposed to distraction, man, that's massive. That's massive. And I think we all need to do better in this space for sure. But what a great, I think that is one of the sage things that I took away from what you were just talking about is just getting rid of those distractions. If you want to become a good guitar player, you make effort and 30 minutes, an hour a day, and you just play and you get better. If you want a relationship to be better, you got to do the same thing. You figure out and you put effort there. You put effort there and you pay attention. Man, that's so good. That's so good.
It's all of the great wisdom of all these other people. I just kind of throw it in a way that hopefully is helpful to understand.
It's so good. That's so good. So I guess pay attention. Don't be distracted. Give lots of compliments. And now let's get to the one of those areas where like, okay, there's the thing, right? There's the thing. How do we address the thing? How do you get to, oh man, I see this behavior. I see this thought process that you have. And I want to point it out. I don't want you to take it personally or think that you are that thing, but I want to bring it up, you know? And how does the person on the offensive side of that, it's not critical. It's not criticism. It's just at some point in a relationship, you got to talk about stuff.
Yeah.
And so are there some tools that you can give our listeners in that space of just, okay, there's a thing. We've got this roadblock and it's causing some bumps in our road and we need to just talk it through. And is there a good and maybe good, better, best way of doing this?
So the way that I like to approach it, and this is where I've taken some of Gottman's stuff and some other things that I've read and studied, and I just created a worksheet that's called Something to Talk About. And basically I just have a scale up from 1 to 10. And I just ask people, I'm like, okay, if you're going to talk about something, if you're going to communicate, and this is more the difficult things. It's not an I love you or, this is if you're bringing up something. On a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this to you? And so I tell people, if it's a 1 to a 3 in terms of importance, let it go. Sure, maybe it's a little bit bothersome or whatever it is, but if you're making a big deal out of everything, that becomes nitpicking, and that's just going to make somebody feel more and more defensive. So if it's really not all that important to you, just let it slide. You don't have to bring up everything. We're married to humans. We're married to people who are imperfect. We don't have to point out everything that we think they should do differently or that we would do differently or whatever it is. So that's 1 through 3. 4, 5, or 6. This is where, again, it's a little bit more important. And I just recommend, in a nice casual way, hey, I would just appreciate it if ... And, it doesn't have to be a huge thing. It does, let's sit down and talk about the fact that you leave stuff on the stairs. And again, real life situation, that's probably like a 5 for me, leaving stuff on the stairs. Because if I'm carrying stuff, I don't want to trip over all the stuff. And so really it is. And we lived in one house where the laundry basket would sit because it was 2/3 of the way down, and then it would do a 90 degree. And it was perfect to set the laundry basket because it was right next to the stairs. And I'm like, I'm going to fall over if I'm carrying, everything down. And hey, I'd really appreciate it if we could not leave the laundry basket right there.
Sure.
Can we put it at the bottom of the stairs, kind of out of the way, or at the top? Like, I'll bring it up. I would just really appreciate it not to be on that landing right there of the stairs.
Yeah.
And, sometimes I say that, and I've talked about the stairs, and honestly, my wife is like, you know what? I can't go down the stairs all the time, and all the kids leave their stuff, and that's a good place out of the way off of the floor. Like, okay, totally get it. Love you. Not that big a deal. We don't need to go into a whole lot with it. We both know where each other stand.
Okay.
Where are we at? 7 or 8. This is where, it's getting a little bit more important. And this is where I recommend, usually people like just whoever wants to initiate the conversation is probably the most important to them. Like, hey, I want to talk with you about something. This is like a 7 or 8 for me. In the next 24 hours, can we sit down and have a 15-minute conversation about this? And I love it. And I tell people it is not a 16-minute conversation. It is a 15-minute conversation.
Oh, yeah. So keep it short.
Keep it short. But if you know you only have 15 minutes, you're going to talk about the things that are most relevant. And what this does is it keeps people from the, hey, we need to talk. And 3 hours later,
oh, by the way,
and then there's this and there's this and there's this, and it becomes 457 things that basically it comes out to, I need you to change.
Yeah.
Well, typically the spouse who's not doing the talking, has checked out by 1 or 2. Like they're not listening anymore.
Gone.
And so it really isn't effective. And I tell people, like, if you feel like you need to have a 3-minute or a 3-hour conversation about something, just go into the mirror and start talking. Like, all it is getting that out. And that could be helpful for you, but that's about as effective as it's going to be. And also setting up the time, because if it's like, can we talk right now? That might be okay. But if we are, 2 minutes left in the University of Tennessee game and they're playing Alabama, yeah, I could pause that game, but I am not going to be as emotionally present at that time as I might be in another way. And so we're wanting, and the same thing, if my wife is in the middle of doing something, like, hey, can we talk about this? When would be a good time in the next 24 hours? 15 minutes. And usually I tell people, summarize everything you need to in 10 and wrap it up in 5.
Yeah.
And then that way it's not this dreaded, oh my gosh, it's going to take hours and I'm just going to be told the laundry list of things that I'm not doing.
Yeah.
So just a good 15-minute conversation. And a lot of those, even from a 7 or 8 standpoint, just knowing like, hey, I want you to understand this. And this has been kind of hard for me, or whatever it is, that can be sufficient. So then that leaves us with what I call the hot topics, 9 or 10 in terms of importance. Like, these are big things. Typically, if it's a 9 or 10 for one person, it's most likely a 9 or 10 for their partner. I don't know too many people where it's like, this is a 10 for me. And it's like, well, this is a 1. Well, then you don't need to talk about it. Like, whoever it is, the 10, just go do what you need to do, or whatever. It's not. So usually these are things that both people are feeling pretty strongly about. Sex, money, religion, politics, family, in-laws, those have a tendency to be the big ones.
The big stuff, yeah.
And so this actually comes from Gottman. He and, I forget, I think it's a woman, last name of Rappaport, but they came up with an intervention. And what I recommend couples do is say, hey, there's something really important that I'd like to talk about. In the next week, can we take at least an hour or so and sit down and talk about XYZ, whatever it is? And then what you do with that, the whole intervention is that you assign a listener and a speaker. The speaker is using I feel statements. They're being positive. They're not criticizing, but they're expressing their needs and what's going on and what they want the other person to understand. The listener does not say a word. They just sit with a notebook and they take notes. And what this does is it pulls the listener out of defensive mode. Yeah. Oh, but wait, no, you said this. And no, allow me to retort, kind of a thing. And I've got to come up with my defense of what you're saying. And that pulls us out of really understanding where the person is coming from. And so you go through that. And then once the speaker is finished, the listener is like, okay, here's what I understood. And you just kind of go through and read your notes. Yeah. This is what I understood, or ask questions or validate. Oh, I'd never thought about it that way. That's a great point. And then you switch places. And then the person who was the listener, again, because it's most likely pretty important to them, here's some things I want you to understand. Now, with most of communication, with a lot of this, a lot of people get caught up in the trap of, well, we need to communicate in order to solve the problems that we're going through. Gottman says that most problems are not resolved in the best and the worst of marriages. If that makes it. 7 out of 10 conflicts are never resolved in the best or the worst of marriages. So the takeaway with that is that there are perpetual problems that don't have sometimes a long-term solution, that it's more important how we interact with each other than the solution itself. And so if we can put the focus on understanding that is the priority, that's the primary reason we're doing this, is to understand one another. Now, there might be a solution that comes in, and I tell people, don't give up a solution. Be like, oh, well, Rich said it's not about solutions. So no, if one comes up, go ahead and use that solution. But if your primary focus is understanding, that's going to strengthen the relationship and help you get through things better than, well, how are we going to solve this? Kind of a thing. So that's my, I've taken from various different things, but just, kind of my approach to, all right, if you need to talk, here's a more effective way to communicate about those difficult things.
I love that. That is just gold. I love the send, receive, write notes, restate, and then, okay, my turn to send. Those are beautiful. And then just get on the same side of the fence and work through it. And, and if you can, the goal might not be to resolve it, like you say. It might just be to understand it.
Yeah.
And that's enough for the other party and everybody. And I think as a receiver, I think sometimes it's, as the person listening, it's sometimes difficult to not rebuttal. Mm-hmm. And if you're just like taking notes and then your objective is to restate, so that diffuses that anger a little bit. It pulls you away from it. And then you can say, oh, my job here is not to be angry and rebuttal. My job here is to understand.
Yeah.
And that's a powerful position. And then, is there anything else? Okay. Can I have a minute to just talk to you for my perspective on this thing as well? Man, it'd be awesome if we could just be reasonable like that at all times.
Yeah. In theory, much simpler.
I know.
In practice,
we get passionate sometimes. Yeah. We get or we're tired, or we're crabby, or we're hangry, or all those things, and it could be a mess sometimes. But man, what a great tool set. That's so cool. As a receiver, as someone who's maybe it's a 5 or a 6, and they're like, hey, you're trying to bring it up. I feel like this is maybe not the right place to put the laundry thing. How, as a receiver, as the person on the other side, on the listener side of that, how can we be better at that space? Because I think that space has the tendency to become defensive and stonewall, right? And so it's not that this is a criticism situation. It's just hey, we need to sometimes work on some things. Yeah. And so I try to lead out with like a lot of love. Hey, I love you. You're a wonderful human. Amazing in 1,000 ways. Here's the thing that I think would be really nice. I feel whatever, just talk about it. I'm terrible at this, but as the receiver, sometimes when my wife comes at me or someone, comes to me with a criticism or a thought process that's different, it's hard sometimes to be like, ooh, can I like push down that almost instinctive defensive position? Like all of us, when somebody comes at us with a thing that's outside of or whatever, we say criticism, but I think it's just working through a thing.
Yeah.
There is a
correction,
tendency.
Maybe
how do we roll that propensity to be defensive? How do we, as the receiver person, how do we process that? Is there a good way just to like, and I think it has to do with what we were talking about, securities and and feeling love and being loved, which is helpful when the person comes to me and the way they approach me. If they say, hey, how's it going? Good person. I love you. Give a hug. And let's talk about some stuff, like that way you feel loved. So you don't feel like you have to be defensive. But still, like, is there a skill set on the receiver side of that seeming, I hate to use the word criticism because it's one of the horsemen, but is the correction. Let's look at the correction. Is there a skill set on the correctee side of that to not take it personal, to not let it destroy them, to not feel so, oh my gosh, this means that I am a horrible person because this person told me that I needed to pick up the laundry basket. And, is there a way on that side of the fence to be better?
If the self-awareness is there, it's everything a lot of what you just said, like, first of all, recognizing I'm taking this personal. Can we shift that to, this is not personal, and if we can look at our own lives, we might correct something and it's not personal. I don't hate my wife because she left the laundry basket years ago on certain steps. Like it's not even anything personal about her. It's just a preference on my standpoint. So if we can kind of see that within ourselves and kind of step back and go, okay, I can see where this is not defining me as a person.
Oh, cool.
But I think it's also important to because you kind of went through the like, oh my gosh, I'm so stupid, or whatever, like all of that negative self-talk. And so if you're aware that you're taking things personal and you want to change that, it's like, oh, well, they're saying it's my fault. Wait, is that what they're saying? They're saying I'm at fault for this. They're saying I'm a bad person because I left the laundry here, or I'm a bad person because I didn't mow the lawn, or whatever it is. No, that's not what they're saying. I'm choosing to believe that that's what they're saying about me.
Because with that follows guilt and shame.
Yeah.
Like it's never productive, never.
Well, and if we really are bad people, there probably should be a healthy sense of guilt there.
Sure.
But the reality, we take that on. I mean, I have so many people like, oh, I feel so guilty, or this, that, or the other. I'm like, why are you feeling guilty?
Yeah.
Well, I'm supposed to feel guilty, right? And I'm like, let me tell you what I would suggest for when it's good to feel guilty. When you have intentionally done something that you know is wrong or is against your values, really healthy to feel a level of guilt for that. Otherwise, let it go. It's not going to do anything good or healthy, but we have a tendency to take that on and then we make it about ourselves. And it could be all of the things that we've talked about, coming in from childhood. Well, see, I am not good enough. And because I didn't put the laundry here, or I'm not doing this enough. And we get caught up in all of these mental traps, which really are just beliefs that are not true.
Yeah.
And so if we can recognize those, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation about the common mental traps people get caught up in. But like, if we can recognize those, then we can work our way out of those a little bit better or much more effectively.
I love it. I think as the receiver, just being emotionally aware, am I taking this personally? Am I feeling guilt or shame right now? That means I'm taking it personally. Well, where do those beliefs kind of come from? And that's not my reality. Let's pull out of that right now. Work on that another day. But let's just, but that is hard in the moment. Those are very, very hard things. And I think that's the beauty of becoming emotionally intelligent humans is that you get better at that process. Like you go from passion and slaying each other with swords and spears and words and hurting the deepest parts of each other's hearts to being more tender and gentle and kind with those spaces.
Yeah. I did leave out, as you were talking about that, I do want to mention in the moment, it's really hard to go to the logical part of like, oh, it's not good to take this personal, kind of thing, or it's not personal. In that moment, it feels like a threat because we have these insecurities, because we're feeling criticized, we're not feeling like we're enough. And anytime we perceive a threat, and you probably know this pretty well, our bodies go into fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
And so
you get the dry mouth,
heart racing, muscle tension. Mm-hmm. That is the worst time to think logically, because in all honesty, if you are in a real threat where you need to be in fight or flight, that is not a good time to sit there and be like, oh, I wonder this bear that's coming after me. How many miles an hour is this bear going, do I think? How many pounds per square inch is jaws going to clamp onto my head? Like, logical doesn't work. It's got to be reactive in order to survive. And so it is hard to access those logical thoughts in that state of arousal. So that's where, we talk about rolling your shoulders and kind of breaking off that tension and deep breathing. And really that does, that helps a ton. And then at that point, in a little bit more of a calm state, you're able to go to, okay, what was I thinking? What felt like the threat to me? Mm-hmm. They were talking about laundry. What is it about laundry that feels like a threat? Right. Where am I going with that? And then you can kind of do some of that inner work to hopefully change that. And the more you do that, like, you don't have to necessarily take 15 minutes on every little thing for the rest of your life. As you start to feel better, you're going to feel more secure. You're going to recognize, hopefully you're in a secure relationship. And, if all of these other things are kind of in play, you're creating a more secure relationship. And then, it might be there, but you quickly like, oh, no, this is what it is. That's okay. And it does become easier to get back into that state.
So just as a recap, I think if we're feeling threatened and our heart rate is going up and our mouth is getting dry, norepinephrine's being released, and you're going to be in fight or flight mode. Maybe, honey, I need to put a pin in this. For some reason, I'm having a very visceral response to this conversation and I need to circle back in 10, 15 minutes. Is that okay? Yeah. Maybe just pause for a minute, because again, once you're in that, forget about it. All those hormones, they're designed to fight. They are designed to fight or flight. And so pause and just put a pin in it. Let's circle back. I need to gather my wits about me a little bit, feel less threatened. And it's nothing to do with the way you approached me. It's just the way I'm feeling right now. And I just need to put a pin in this for a minute and we can circle back. But otherwise it's not going to go well. Yeah. So that's really smart. I really like that. That's a great, I feel like you've given us a lot of really good nuggets today and just good pearls to kind of help us with our relationships. And, I really want to circle back on that vulnerability. I think it's the essence to all of this. If we can get really comfortable with our own mortality, our own, call it imperfect state, our, we all have weaknesses and flaws. And if we can look at that and say, it's okay, right? Give myself permission to be imperfect and be flawed. And that's hard as a doctor, right? Like sometimes we got this ego thing and we're taught all this stuff and we can't be wrong, et cetera. And I just don't think that's true. And if we can get to that hyper vulnerable, maybe not hyper vulnerable, reasonably vulnerable state, man, is it really good. It's a place, it is a position of power. My daughter created a Instagram feed, I think it was called Papa Juan, and it was just me being totally dorky. And she would catch me in these moments and I'm like, honey, don't put that online. Because we were like very, very mortal, just very imperfect. Mm-hmm. And all of her friends loved this feed. And it was hilarious because we'd be joking and we'd be, doing really silly, sometimes inappropriate things. But I think it was neat for her friends to see this doctor being very vulnerable and showing, the weak parts of his being, as opposed to the perfect parts of everybody's lives on social media. So I let her do it, and I was like, okay, I guess I'll do that. So
awesome.
But it's neat. I think it was neat for me to be vulnerable for a community. And it was neat for her. I think it created a sense of like comfort in her own skin. And I think, if we can just do more of that, it'd be really good for us.
I truly believe in a general sense, we connect more with people based on imperfections than on perfections, because we can relate.
Yeah.
If I met someone who truly was perfect, it would be hard to relate to that person because I'm not. And so, and I've seen this in groups and stuff. I used to run groups with adolescents, and I mean, I think it was one girl started it, and she mentioned that she was struggling with pornography, and there were like 20 kids in the group. She started it, and every one of them went around, and everyone except 3 in that group admitted to either struggling or having struggled with it. And it was one of the coolest, like they were glued together and emotionally. Yeah. And it's not to say that we just throw out all of our warts and all of our imperfections, but in an appropriate place, and at times that willingness to be vulnerable and to go there just like really created this connection that was like no other. And whether that's in our own marriages and relationships with our own children, in general, it is good to be around imperfect people. I love imperfect people.
Totally.
They're great. And so, if we can allow ourselves to show that, I think we'll feel a greater sense of connection.
Thank you so much for coming today. This was super amazing. And I learned a lot. I hope our listeners learned a lot of cool things. Just in closing, one of my good friends, he's a dentist. He and I were just talking about relationship stuff one time, and he said, there was a moment a couple years ago where I looked at my wife in all of her strengths and weaknesses, all of it, and I just loved it all. And he said, it has changed my relationship completely. And I think that is the most beautiful sign of a really thriving relationship, is an ability to put your arms around all of it, all the weaknesses, all the strengths, and just love unconditionally through that. That's really cool. That's really cool. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's always a pleasure.
Well, guys, I hope you learned something cool today. Richard Tripp, just a wealth of knowledge. Thank you again. And don't forget to like and subscribe, share with your friends and family as you see fit. Thanks.